Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to the Little Scrolls Bible Study as we continue our look tonight at 2 Samuel. And tonight we're going to be looking at 2 Samuel chapter 6. So if you haven't got a Bible with you yet, make sure you go and get one or use the one that's on your phone. And if you're watching us on YouTube, feel free to join in with the chat. If this is your first time, why not subscribe so that you'll know when the other meetings are coming, or they should be every Monday, and it'll give you an opportunity to keep up with our uploads as well as our live streams so that you'll be able to join in with all of the sessions. Tonight we're going to be continuing our study, Promise to Kingdom, as we slowly move towards the end of this very long, almost 2-year study, bringing together the books of Joshua, Judges, Ruth, and 1st and 2nd Samuel, as we look at what it was for the children of Israel who were waiting to enter into the promised land that was given to Abraham, to conquering, inhabiting, prospering, losing, and then becoming a kingdom. So if you've got your Bible with you, why not turn with me to 2 Samuel chapter 6, and I will read it with you. Again, David gathered all the choice men of Israel, 30,000. And David arose and went with all the people who were with him from Baal Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, whose name is called by the name, the Lord of hosts, who dwells between the cherubim. So they set the ark of God on a new cart, and they brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. And Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, drove the new cart. They brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill, accompanying the ark of God. And Ahio went before the ark. Then David and all the house of Israel played music before the Lord, on all kinds of instruments of fir, wood, on harps, on stringed instruments, on tambourines, on sistrums, and on cymbals. And when they came to Nation's threshing floor, Uzzah put out his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled. Then the anger of the Lord was aroused against Uzzah, and God struck him there for his error, and he died there by the ark of God. And David became angry because of the Lord's outbreak against Uzzah, and he called the name of the place Perez Uzzah to this day. Now David was afraid of the Lord that day, and he said, "How can the ark of the Lord come to me?" So David would not move the ark of the Lord with him into the city of David, but David took it aside into the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. The ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite 3 months, and the Lord blessed Obed-Edom all his household. Now it was told King David, said that the Lord has blessed the house of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him because of the ark of God. So David went and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with gladness. And so it was, when those bearing the ark of the Lord had gone 6 paces, that he sacrificed oxen and fatted sheep. Then David danced before the Lord with all his might, and was wearing a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the trumpet. And as the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, Saul's daughter, looked through a window and saw King David leaping and whirling before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. So they brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place in the midst of the tabernacle that David had erected for it. Then David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And when David had finished offering burnt offerings and peace offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts, and he distributed amongst all the people, amongst the whole multitude of Israel, both women and the men, to every one a loaf of bread, a piece of meat, and a cake of raisins. And all the people departed, every one to his house. Then David returned to bless his house. And Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, "How glorious was the king of Israel today, uncovering himself today in the eyes of the maids of his servants, as one of the base fellows shamelessly uncovers himself." So David said to Michal, "It was before the Lord who chose me instead of your father, and all his house, to appoint me ruler over the people of the Lord over Israel. Therefore I will play music before the Lord, and I will be even more undignified than this, and they will be humble in my own sight. But as for the maidservants of whom you have spoken, by them I will be held in honor." Therefore Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no children to the day of her death. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, and for those of us that have been a while, a quick reminder that when we're looking at history books, we're not really looking at what the past was, but we're looking at what the future is to be. And that isn't just true for prophetic history or biblical history. It's actually true in all history. All history is written to tell the people that are reading it where they came from so that they know where they're going, to help them to show the direction. And that's why we can have a history, a national history, that under one particular government can be seen as terrible and shameful, and under another government it can be seen as wonderful and as nation building and helping us to get where we are. If you didn't know history was political, then now you do, and it's often why most universities teach history next to politics. But what about biblical history? Is it meant to be political? Well, like most history, it looks at the kings and it looks at the rulers and it looks at the leaders. But it's not to be interpreted by the political will of the people of the time, or even of the people of our time, taking the Bible and making it fit our narrative, our beliefs, the way that we think things should be, but rather that it follows God's politics. And if you think, well, does God have politics? Then I heard a preacher recently say, his politics, God's politics, are the politics of the Lamb. And what I mean by that is, well, if you've watched the American elections, you know the Democratic Party is often has a donkey. The Republicans often have an elephant. If you didn't know that, I don't know if there is an English equivalent actually. I don't think the animals kind of come in then. That it means that we as the church should never get stuck into being on the left or the right of anything, or even thinking that the center is the right place. Sometimes none of them are. The right place to get behind is the politics of Jesus Christ, and these are his politics. He is coming again, and he is going to build a kingdom, and his kingdom will last eternally. And we who are here on this earth now, we should be seeking first the kingdom of heaven. And why should we be doing that? Because that's what Jesus told us to do. And what should we be going out and talking about? The kingdom of heaven. And sometimes it's a subject that's rarely ever studied at all, but it's one thing that Jesus talked about all the time. And so when we're looking at this history, which is about the establishment of the throne of David, we're not just looking at, oh, isn't it great that David became a king, this shepherd boy raised up from nowhere, from a small village that was famous for its bread, to now becoming the king of all Israel in the place of a bad king. But we're actually seeing the establishment of a throne that through David, because Jesus would descend through the line of David, would mean that Jesus could rule on earth without seizing anybody's throne, but that God established an earthly throne that he could legitimately sit upon and inherit. Remember, God is a just God. If God was a God who just took things, then he wouldn't really be any different to all other things, all other leaders. And yet he has the power. As Jesus said, do you not think that my Father couldn't send down a legion of angels? God could force us to worship him, but he doesn't want that. And so this kingdom is an earthly kingdom, not a pie in the sky one, not one that's in the mystery clouds to come at some point after we've died and the there beyond. But it is a place that is spiritual, that touches earth when 2 or 3 are gathered. And when we learn about the kingdom that is established under David, we are learning about a coming kingdom. And Jeremiah, who was the author of these books, was writing to the last people who were under one of David's descendants. And he lost that kingdom as they were carried away off to modern day Iran, crossed desert lands, dispersed around the world. Even today, Jewish people all around the world, more living outside of Israel than inside of Israel, dispersed, the diaspora, but with the promise, the famous Jeremiah 29:11, the plans I have for you to prosper you and not to harm you. The plans that God has of a great salvation that isn't just over the house of Israel, but is to all those who turn to Jesus, who turn to him and accept him as their Lord and Savior. And as the Word of God tells us, we are grafted into that vine, and we too become citizens of that kingdom. And that's why it's important, not just for, oh, isn't it interesting where Jesus came from, but isn't it interesting to know where we're going? 2 Samuel has been the establishment of David's throne. And what we have seen is it has not been established by clever politics or emotion politics, kind of trying to be everybody's buddy and get on that side. It didn't work like that. It wasn't taken by the force of a sword. It wasn't taken by the murdering of your opponents. Instead, he waited until the day that all of Israel recognized him. And you know, when Jesus came, he preached the gospel to all the house of Israel. When the Syrophoenician woman came to him and asked him to heal her daughter, Jesus was clear, my mission is to the house of Israel. And she said, yes, but even the dogs get to eat the crumbs. Understanding, in the same way that Jesus broke the loaves and the fishes at the feeding of the 5,000, and of all of Israel that was gathered got to eat of the bread, and when the leftovers were carried back into the baskets, there was still the same amount left to go beyond Israel, that through that house all the nations will be blessed, just like the Lord said to Abraham, through you all nations will be blessed. We are grafted into that. And David's throne was not brought by force. And Jesus, who lived but was rejected by Israel, only held on by a remnant, a small amount, just like David was. One day they will look upon him whom they have pierced, and they will weep. Just like Joseph's brother looked upon him whom they cast into a pit, and realized he was now second in command of all the world. And they wept, for their salvation had come. And one day all knees will bow and all tongues will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. But even now, when that is not the case, he is our King. We confess him as, just as the house of Judah did. So do we. And now we get to this chapter, and I've got to say, it's one of my personal favourites. I love this chapter. It's the coming back of the Ark of God. And for those of you that have listened to some of this series, maybe you've gone back to when we were looking at the start of 1 Samuel, which feels quite some time ago, you'll realise that the Ark of God has been eerily quiet for some time. In fact, it's actually been quiet through this whole series, which is funny if you think about what we read in the law books. When we read in the law books, we read of God establishing the tabernacle. He gives Moses these clear instructions of how it should be built, the dimensions of every cloth, of every piece, of what should be made and how they should be made, and even fills with the Holy Spirit the people who are going to make it. And when he gets down to the Ark of the Covenant, which we'll look at shortly, he describes it in such detail that you could type Ark of the Covenant in and you will see lots of versions of the Ark of the Covenant people have made at home in relation to what it looks like. Of course, there's variation, and the reason there's variation is the measurement is in cubits, and a cubit is from there to there, and you do there to there next to the person sat to you, it's a different size. So whose cubit is it? And that's a fair reason. But the ark was given these specific instructions. The tabernacle was given these specific instructions. And then in the history of Israel, from crossing over the Jordan right through to the establishment of the kingdom, barely have Eva got a look in. Can you imagine such a thing when you're talking about the spiritual dimensions of God's kingdom, that the tabernacle and the ark, where the mercy seat is, are barely mentioned at all? This is the coming back of the ark. And if you aren't aware of why David is bringing back the ark, or should I say, where is the ark coming from, then you kind of have to go back a little bit. And we go back to the beginning of Samuel's own childhood. So we're going back some 70 years. Now 70 years is a very significant number in the Bible. There were 70 that went into into Egypt. 70 families that left. There are 70 in the Sanhedrin that condemned Jesus. There is 70 in the promise to Daniel on how long it will be. It was 70 years that the children of Israel were kept out of Israel after Jeremiah's prophecy. In fact, it was Jeremiah who said 70 years of rest for the land before the proclamation that would go out from Cyrus the Great that Israel could return and rebuild the temple and rebuild the walls. 70 years the ark of God has sat quietly. It's not been mentioned. And it's not been mentioned because it's not important. What happened to the ark of God, we read in 1 Samuel chapter 4, is that during a battle at a time of utter godlessness, the people of Israel thought to themselves, the way that we're going to get God to fight our battles for us is hold him over a barrel. We'll bring his ark out, and once his ark comes out, then he has to fight for us. But what ends up happening is the Philistines. And it's interesting that it is the Philistines, since they are the great enemy of Israel at this time, whom David has recently defeated. But the Philistines, terrified of this very thing, thinking that it's God in a box. It's their secret weapon. Israel have brought God into the camp. God lives in a box, and they've brought God out in the box. And here it comes, they carry this box in. But what ends up happening is the Philistines defeat them. They carry it off. They take it to their capital city. And every morning when they wake up, the statue of Dagon is lying prostrate in front. And everywhere that it goes, everyone starts to suffer boils, plagues of rats and mice. And in fact, in the end, there's almost a civil war going on within Philistia itself. They want it gone. So they stick it on the back of a cart with 2 milk cows to see if God really is behind it. Knowing that if the cow went left, it was because it just wanted grass, which is what cows want. But if it went right, it was because God was directing it, because it was going away from the natural desire of the milk cow. And of course it went away. It went into the land. And eventually it stayed at the house of Abinadab for 70 years. Not a mention, not a word. Ignorance. Under the time of Saul, under the times of Samuel, it was not right to bring it back. But what's even more surprising about all of this is that the tabernacle, which is the tented temple that the children of Israel carried around the wilderness with them, which began with the placing of the Ark of the Covenant, and then the Holy of Holies being built around it, then the holy place built around that, then the tabernacle built around that, then the outer court built around that. The Ark and the temple have also been separated for 70 years. So when the high priest goes in to give atonement on the Day of Atonement once a year, he's going in to an empty room. And his job is to sprinkle blood upon the mercy seat which sits on the top of the Ark of the Covenant. But when he goes in there, there is no mercy seat. There is no Ark. And this is identical to the times of Jesus. But now the chaos of Saul's reign is over. The chaos of the civil war between Ishbosheth, I got that name in again, and David is over. The division of Judah and the other 10 tribes for now is back on hold. Jerusalem has now been captured. There is now a capital city. It's been designated. David has brought all of the things together, shall we say, like a good spiritual leader. He's brought some kind of order to the chaos. You know, we might think, and as Pentecostals, evangelicals, we're well known for loving a little bit of, we're just going to turn up and see what the Holy Spirit does. But you know, it's not honouring to God if we don't plan things. Here he is, the man, the planner. And when we read about David, we're going to read more about it. This man plans. He plans. He loves a list. He loves a procedure more than the best administrator out there. And people think of him as this exciting, daring dude with an eye patch and a swashbuckling sword out there swinging around like Rob Roy. But he's an administrator. Every word of it. He loves a procedure. You wait till we get later on. He's got whole lists of people and what choir they're in. He brings order. And what is now going to be the best sign? Chaos, Philistine invasion, civil war, brother against brother. Now is a time of national healing and unity. Doesn't that sound familiar? What could be the best thing to unify excuse me, all the people of God? Oh God, let's bring the ark into Jerusalem. Now, when I was at university studying history, one of the things that they taught us is a great danger of studying history is something that we call telescoping. It's a bit of a problem when you're studying history that when you've lived it or lived past it or you've read about it, you know what's coming next. But the people who are living it do not. And often we can telescope history. So the ark returning to Jerusalem doesn't seem so odd to us because we know that the ark will live in Jerusalem in the temple, and it will actually be Jeremiah that disposes of it. And nobody's found it since Harrison Ford. But not even he. The top men are looking after it. But Jerusalem, to this point, is a newly captured city. Only years ago, only moments ago, was the capital of the Jebusites. And wasn't called Jerusalem, the city of peace. It was called Jebus, after the god Jebus. It was a place of worship of another. And now it was for the worship of God. The world's three major religions see Jerusalem as having holy significance. But let's not make the mistake, friends, of thinking that the physical location of Jerusalem is the definition of Jerusalem. The Bible is very clear. When the Lord talks about Jerusalem, this special city, the one that becomes the lifeboat, the end of, the place that's all that exists of Israel, and the place that's resurrected, the place that Jesus himself will be crucified in. This physical location is really a representation of you and me, born again believers, who are the spiritual Jerusalem, the bride of Christ, his holy city. We cannot be measured. Our number is so great that John couldn't count it. We are through the ages. We're older than any nation that exists. We will exist longer than any nation will come. It is the kingdom that we wait for. But it's none of that yet. Right now, it's just a newly captured city that a Judah king has decided to make the capital outside of Judah. The Benjamite city of Jebus has become the capital of all Israel, the city of peace, Jerusalem. And there's no temple. and there's no tabernacle. There's none of it. So to bring the ark of God here is not old news, it's new news. It's a declaration of intent of what David is saying. He's saying, I'm going to be the king of all Israel. It was only 40 years ago that Israel decided it wanted a king. And the king that was chosen rejected God. Now David says, I'm going to build a city, that city of God. And I'm going to build a nation of God. And what is it going to be? It's going to be a nation under God. So many have tried to do it. So many still try to do it. Even now the declarations, and Christians don't get locked in the politics of this world. Because the evidence of the scripture teaches that even David falls short of trying to build a nation under God by the declaration of it being under God. Only God can build the kingdom under God. Only Jesus can establish his kingdom. The Old Testament teaches us that. Let us not fall into the traps of trying to resurrect communities, but instead let us bring unto the ark of God those who are being saved, that they may be a part of his kingdom. This is what the history teaches us of the present that is to come. And so we have an ark that has lived in somebody's garage for 70 years, behind the bikes, under the dryer, near the tent. And now it's been brought into the presence of God. What was the ark? Well, let's have a look at its construction, because the ark is an important and integral element here. What is it that David's bringing into the city? Why does it make a difference? I'm going to read to you from Exodus chapter 25, and this is God's instructional on how the ark itself must be built. And it says this from Exodus 25. Starting at verse 10. And they shall make an ark of acacia wood. 2.5 cubits shall be its length. 1.5 cubits its width, 1.5 cubits its height. You shall overlay it with pure gold inside and out. You shall overlay it. You shall make it on a moulding of gold all around. You shall cast 4 rings of gold for it and put them in the 4 corners. 2 rings shall be on one side, 2 rings on the other. You shall make poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. You shall put the poles into the rings on the sides of the ark, and that the ark may be carried by them. The poles shall be in the rings of the ark, and they shall not be taken from it. And you shall put into the ark the testimony which I give you. You shall make a mercy seat of pure gold. 2.5 cubits shall be its length, 1.5 cubits its width. And you shall make the 2 cherubim of gold of hammered work. You shall make them at 2 ends of the mercy seat. And 1 cherub at one end, the other cherub at the other end. And you shall make the cherubim at the 2 ends of it of one piece with the mercy seat. And the cherubim shall stretch out their wings above, covering the mercy seat with their wings. And they shall face one another. The faces of the cherubim shall be towards the mercy seat. And you shall put the mercy seat on top of the ark. And in the ark you shall put the testimony that I will give you. And there I will meet with you. I will speak with you. From above the mercy seat, from between the 2 cherubim, which are on the ark of the testimony, about everything which I will give you in commandment of the children of Israel. Now, it's not that God hasn't been speaking to David up till this point, because of course he had the high priest with him. And the high priest carried in his pocket a Urim and Thummim. But at the moment we've got what we would call, or what the chefs call, a deconstructed temple. We've got the tabernacle over there. We've got the high priest over here. And we've got the ark over there. They're all supposed to be in the same place. But we have this wonderful, beautiful construction. But don't think that God is being elaborate here by making something of gold. Everything that it's made of has a purpose, it has a meaning. Gold, when it turns up in the Bible, it has a type. It always refers to the divine, to divinity, to the divine nature of God, to his kingliness. And so we have a work that's surrounded entirely in gold, but it's structurally made of something called acacia wood. Now the acacia groves were where the children of Israel were waiting to cross over. Acacia wood is a very slow growing tree, and it grows incredibly wide, which is why it's good for making boards from, because it means you can make one solid piece, very thin. But it grows slowly, which means its grain is very tight. It makes it very hard for woodworm to eat, for it to rot. In fact, acacia wood is known for lasting centuries. Its work and wood can last a great deal, and it rarely rots. In fact, it's incorruptible. And when we see acacia in the Bible, we're always talking about the incorruptible nature of God. So we have a box that is structurally made of the incorruptible nature, surrounded by the divine nature, and sat upon top of it is a seat called the mercy seat. And that doesn't need any explanation. It is who God is. Mercy, the mercy of God poured out on all mankind, and God says, I will meet with you in the mercy seat. Mercy is where people come to God. Mercy is where they grab hold of him. Mercy is what we find. It says, I am thoroughly filthy and guilty, but Lord, please let me go. And he will. And it's covered. And the mercy seat of God sits upon the incorruptible nature of God, surrounded by the divine nature of God. But what is inside of it? Well, we see it in Hebrews 9 verse 4. Funnily enough, in the New Testament, it declares to us, and you're going to see this slide coming up on the screen now. And it simply says this: having a golden altar of incense and the ark of the covenant overlaid all around with gold, in which was the golden pot that had manna, Aaron's rod that budded, and the tablets of the covenant. And you might think, well, they're strange things to have inside of a box. But think about what they are. The manna, the bread from heaven, which Jesus said, I am the manna. I am the bread of life. That bread that fed supernaturally the children where there was no food. God, the provider. Then Aaron's rod that budded. Well, you know, you make a chair, you make a table out of a piece of wood. The last thing you want to do when you wake up in the morning is find that it's grown into a tree. When you cut the wood from the tree, it dies. And it performs the hard substance and the material that we want it to do, but it's not got life in it. If it was made from fruit trees, you're not going to get apples out of a chair. If it was made from cherries, you're not going to get cherries out of your chair. And if you woke up in the morning and found that it had blossomed, it would be surprising. His rod budded. It was found as being an example that Aaron was chosen to be high priest over all of us from the different houses of Israel. His rod budded and it developed almonds. It's a resurrection statement. Here is something that's dead and life comes back into it. And then the tablets, meaning of course the law tablets that were given. And here we have the Ten Commandments, the justice of God. Now the mercy seat of God sits over the justice of God. The mercy seat declares, only mercy can be declared when you understand the just. If you don't think you're guilty, you're not asking for mercy. You're asking for justice. But if you know that you're guilty because the law condemns you, then you're asking for mercy. And God's mercy overlays. Now that's a great deal to say about one golden box that's carried around on the shoulders of a few guys. But there's a lot about this box that really speaks to us about the nature of God. And in a sense, everything that I've just described there, the incorruptible nature of God, surrounded by the divinity of God, topped by the mercy of God, and filled inside by the justice, resurrection power, and great provision of the Lord, well, it's a reference to Jesus. So when we look at the ark of God, which sits right in the center of the holiest place then really we're talking about the Son of God. It's a representation of who he is. It points to Christ. And although, again, we can't telescope the history, David didn't know that's what he was bringing. In a sense, when we're looking at our own future here, we're looking at David, whom, having now been established as king, brings Jesus into the center. And he says, I want Jesus to be the center. What good leader, what good pastor, what good elders, what good people of the church don't want to bring Jesus into the center of all that we are. And yet, with all this great intention, with all this goodness of God, with all this putting Jesus first, a man dies. David goes in a bad mood. The ark gets left in somebody else's garage. And everybody moves on with their lives. It all started off so well, and then it went so wrong. Why did it go so wrong? Well, there's a question to be asked about. What is the heart of the people now about the Ark of God? What do they see it as? They've not paid it any mind for many years. And David is now the one who's decided to make it a big thing. In the first 5 verses of 2 Samuel chapter 6, we saw that everybody was in agreement with this. It seemed like a great idea. David consulted everybody. And as an interesting sideline to this, 1 Chronicles 13 tells exactly the same story or narrative, but of course it's written after the exile period by Ezra the scribe. And it's virtually the same. First 5 verses talk about how everybody's consulted. The Levites are consulted. The worshippers are consulted. The people are consulted. The princes are consulted. Everybody's for this. It's a great idea. I mean, you can't get consensus like this. Seriously, you have a church council meeting with 9 people in it and you have 15 different opinions. You can never get consensus like this in anything when it comes to the kingdom of heaven. Here it is. Everybody's in agreement. It just seems that God's going to be pedantic in this matter. What did they see the ark as? Did they see it like the Philistines? Was it God in a box? Were they bringing God in a box? Well, let's have a look at one of these scriptures again here. 2 Samuel 6:2. Mike is going to put it up here on the screen. But it simply says this. David arose, went with all the people who were with him from Baal Judah, to bring up from there the ark of God, whose name is called by the name the Lord of hosts, who dwells between the cherubim. Now, if you remember from the Exodus scripture that I read out, those cherubim sit as one hammered piece of gold, one piece of gold that makes up the 2 cherubim, and in the midst of them, the mercy seat, that place that we come to meet God. There, right in the midst, where the glory of God dwells, it tells us. David made it clear. It's not God in a box. God doesn't live in a box. He dwells amongst the cherubim. And what they're really trying to bring in now is the holy presence of God. You know, when the children of Israel were in the wilderness, every day they would see the smoke of God, and at night the fire of God. And when it rested upon that place, they knew to stop and set up the tents. The holy presence of God. Now, as evangelical Pentecostal Christians, do you not feel a sense of calling the presence of God? Oh, you can't stand in a meeting without somebody saying, call down the fire, brothers. You ever pick up a hymns or a redemption tidings and see a half a dozen hymns in there that talk about the fire of God descending upon the faithful? We love the fire. Call the Shekinah indwelling presence of God. Oh, Karabash, Yarababash, Karababa. Call down the presence of God. The holy presence of God into our hearts. Still feels like David's doing the right thing and God's being pedantic here. In fact, this is what we read in Isaiah 37, verse 16. O Jehovah of hosts, God of Israel, who dwells between the cherubs, you are He, God, you alone, to all the kingdoms of the earth. You have made the heavens and the earth. Oh, the presence of God, who dwells amongst the cherubim. So what went wrong? If they knew it wasn't God in a box, if they just wanted the same fire of God. You know what, friends? When I read that, when I see that, when I know that, what I see on this page is my own desire for the pouring out of God upon the nations. I can see David's heart and say, it's mine. If only old men will dream dreams, young men will prophesy. So there's a lesson for us here who may desire a unity amongst the brethren, amongst the people of God, amongst His own, under the presence for the ark of Jesus Christ, that He might dwell in the center of our own capital, that we don't make the same mistake that ends in death and dysfunction. What did he do wrong? Well, we see in God's clear instruction in the book of Numbers. It's going to come up as a banner at the bottom, but we see in Numbers chapter 4, verses 1 to 15, that God gives some very clear instruction. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, take a census of the sons of Kohath from amongst the children of Levi, by their families and by their father's house, from 30 years old and above, even to 30 years old, all who enter the service to do the work in the tabernacle of meeting. This is the service of the sons of Kohath, in the tabernacle of meeting, relating to the most holy things. When the camp prepares to journey, Aaron and his sons shall come. They shall take down the covering veil, cover the ark of the testimony with it, and they shall put on it a covering of badger skins, and spread over that a cloth entirely of blue. They shall insert its poles on the table of showbread. They shall spread a blue cloth, and put on it the dishes, the pans, the bowls, the pitchers, for pouring, and the showbread shall be on it. And they shall spread over them a scarlet cloth, and cover the same with a covering of badger skins, and they shall insert its poles. And they shall take a blue cloth, and cover the lampstands of light with its lamps, its wick trimmers, its trays, and all its oil vessels with which they serve. And they shall put it with all its utensils in a covering of badger skin, and put it on a carrying beam. Over the golden altar they shall spread a blue cloth, and cover it with a covering of badger skins, and they shall insert its poles. They shall take all the utensils of the service with which they minister in the sanctuary, put them in a blue cloth, and cover them with a covering of badger skins, and put them on a carrying beam. And also they shall take away the ashes from the altar, and spread a purple cloth over it. They shall put on it all the implements with which they minister there, the fire pans, the forks, the shovels, the basins, and all the utensils of the altar. And they shall spread on it a covering of badger skins, and insert its poles. And when Aaron and his sons have finished covering the sanctuary, then all the furnishings of the sanctuary, and when the camp is set to go, then the sons of Kohath shall come to carry them. But they shall not touch any holy thing, lest they die. These are the things to the tabernacle of meeting which the sons of Kohath are to carry. Now these may be the parts of the Bible that you skip over and you think, gosh, I don't want to hear about sticking a spoon in a badger skin and carrying it somewhere. What on earth are you doing, God? This is the scriptures. We could thin some of this out if we got rid of some of this repeated tat. Why are you talking about carrying things around in blue cloths and white cloths and badger skins, or dug-on skins, as some of the versions say, or even some say rock badger skins, whatever a rock badger is. But it's all important. The ark of God was made of solid gold. Gold's heavy. And that solid gold was then turned in the same hammering into 4 loops to which poles were passed around and men were to carry on their shoulders. One of these things that people find difficult to understand about the Bible is this. Because speaking, if you lifted it from the ground, if you could lift it from the ground, just the ark itself. Because gold is such a pliable metal, the reality is the hooks would rip straight out. So who's carrying the ark? I know many of you have heard me say this before, so it may sound like repeated. You may even have known what I was going to say, but actually there's further to go on here. First of all, who's moving the ark? Are the 4 sons of Kohath or the 8 sons of Kohath who are carrying the ark, are they the ones moving it, or is God moving it? And that's a statement of faith. The reality is God moves it because that ark sometimes doesn't go where the children of Israel want to go. And in fact, sticking it on a cart means that you now have taken the God nature out of it. You can tell God where he's going. Now we might look at this verse and say everything that David wanted to do was right, but the way he went about it was just wrong. And of course it says, if anybody touches the ark, he's a dead man. Not because God is spiteful, but because God is holy. And the way we come to God is not by touching him directly, but by coming to his mercy seat. Not by choosing to steal his power from him, but seeking his mercy. But there's a reason that we're listening about spoons and tables. Because they didn't just carry the ark, they carried the lot. It all went on top. Because the table, well, it carried the bread and the wine. And the lampstand, it carried the holy oil and it pointed to the bread and the wine. And the incense was where the prayers of the saints were. They all point to God. They're all the nature of Christ. And when they carried them, they didn't carry them bare. They didn't carry them naked. They didn't carry them for all to see. The ark was something you could read about, but you didn't get to see it. Only the high priest got to see it. And only he once a year. The ark was carried covered in the skins of animals. The same skins that were killed in order to cover the nakedness of Adam and Eve. Humanity. Blood soaked humanity and sacrifice covering the familiarity or over familiarity with Jesus, who is to be known as beloved but is still fully divine, is to be known in the flesh, to be known as Christ, not to be reached beyond. The disciples carried Jesus exhausted into a boat. Joseph of Arimathea carried him dead from a cross. Nicodemus anointed the wounds and bandaged the body of a pre-resurrected Christ, and Thomas touched the wounds. But nobody got to see see the undiluted, divine nature of God, except for God, because its presence is too holy for us to. And if we walk in there, we'd better do it like Samuel did, with the pure innocence of a child who doesn't know it's not where he shouldn't be. But when you know that you're a sinner, you don't grab hold of the divinity of God. You grab hold of the mercy seat of Christ. Because God isn't pedantic. It isn't a case of, my rules are the rules, and you didn't follow them, so tough luck, kid. Even though everything you wanted was good. If it isn't built right, it isn't built. And there's a way that seems right to a man, even a godly way that seems right to a man. But if God doesn't build the house, David wanted all that was right. And yet he did something that he hadn't done in his more recent events. He inquired of the Levites. And he inquired of the people. He inquired of the priests. He inquired of the princes. He wanted to see what everybody wanted. But of course, that's where Saul went wrong. But he didn't inquire of God. He didn't call of the Urim and Thummim. He wouldn't even invade the Philistines. He asked for every single battle command that he should go for. But he brought the ark in his own way. But there's a way that's right. And it's God's way. And David lost it. He got in a right stompy mood with God. It tells us he did. He was not happy. You ruined things for me, God. I had plans. And now because we didn't do it your way, but it has to be his way. The architect tells you how to build the building, but the builder builds it. Friends, you won't be happy if your architect demands for a certain specification of iron bars for steel's I-beams to be used at a particular construct, and your builder decides to change it for spaghetti because it looks nicer. The architect knows the bigger picture, and the builder knows the bit that he's in. The builder may have the skill of the task that's given to him at that moment, but the architect sees the whole thing. And that's what David did wrong. But here's something interesting. Uzzah wasn't some guy dragged off the street to bring the ark into Jerusalem. He'd lived with it for years. It had been out in the garage. It had been out in an outhouse. It had been out there. And he had not come to respect the nature of God. It had lived in the unfiltered world, open. Instead of in its holy place, it had been left. That man and beast could come and see the divine presence of God. And it was not respected as what it was. God needs my help. I must put my hand out to steady him. God, you don't know what you're doing, is the next sentence that comes out of our mouth. So the Lord left it. And it went to the house of Obed-Edom. And something interesting happened at the house of Obed-Edom. It blessed him. 70 years it lived with Abinadab, hadn't made a peep. 7 months it lived with the Philistines, and it nearly caused a civil war, and got Dagon sitting down. But Abinadab and Uzzah and his sons had all lived as though it were just a box in the shed. Like some American picker's barn find. We've gone in and we found, oh look, it's a Ford Mustang from 1920s and the Ark of the Covenant. Covered in hay. But Obed-Edom, he blessed him. Why did he bless him? Well, there's something interesting about Obed-Edom. We read him in a list that comes later in 1 Chronicles 15. It's just going to come up on the screen now, and it's just a list of names. One of those you're going to be glad that I didn't make you read out in any way, shape, or form. Put it on for me, son. It says, "O Jehovah of hosts, God of Israel." No, that's not the right one, son. That's the Isaiah scripture again. Obed. I want to try that again. 1 Chronicles. Let me just find it. 1 Chronicles 15. And verse 18, and we read, "And with them their brethren of the second rank, Zechariah, Ben Jaziel, Shemiramoth, Jehiel, Uni, Eliab, Benaiah, Messiah, Mattaniah, Elipheth, Micaniah, Obed-Edom, and Jeiel, the gatekeepers." Well, that might not mean anything to you. David is listing the priesthood. And you think about a royal family, they like to have an heir and a spare. What happens to the third one? Well, usually they end up in the military. But all of our royal family in the military. But this is the way it worked in the aristocracy. You got the one who's going to come next. He's got the title. You got one who ends up going off into the military. And the third one used to end up going into the church. Funnily enough, it is a kind of a case. But for the priesthood, it wasn't dissimilar. You had one who was going to carry on the name, the heir. You had the spare just in case the heir dropped dead. But the third born son, as it says, the seconds. You know, it's kind of like the first floor's on the second floor kind of thing. The third born. They got the lowliest job that all the priesthood could get. They were just gatekeepers. When I think about that, a song comes to my head. I'd rather be a gatekeeper in the house of the Lord than dwell in the tents of the wicked. Now, when I was younger, it never made any sense to me, because why would you want to live in a tent? But of course, it's not tents like, you know, the poor and the homeless live in, or refugees live in. It was the silk tents of the Bedouins. Luxurious, cool, full of women, hot and totting. But to dwell there, or would I rather take the lowliest job? And you see, the thing about gatekeepers, like Obed-Edom, is they had 3 very specific jobs. The first was to help the poor and the needy to find comfort. The second was to ring the bell to encourage everybody to come to the house of the Lord at the times of worship and the times of offering. And their greatest job was that when a servant decided that he no longer wanted to be a free man, but forever wanted to be a bond servant of his master, they would take them to the gate post of the house of the Lord. They would drive the awl through the ear and put an earring in so that they were permanently known as a bond servant. This is commonly seen as the decision that we make as Christians, as is shown in Romans 12:1, that we offer ourselves willingly as sacrifices to the Lord, as our reasonable sacrifice. We give our lives when we don't have to. We pour our existence and say, "You are our King, we are your servants forever," when we're not commanded to or demanded of, but we choose to. Through love and respect, we want to be in this kingdom. The gatekeeper, the lowly, who helps the poor and needy come and find relief, who calls people to the temple and worship of God, who makes bond servants. He found blessing in the ark of God. It wasn't found in the great worship session of everybody united. It wasn't found in the great desire for an outpouring of the fire of God. It was found in the gatekeeper who called those home He didn't bless Abinadab. It wasn't about location. It isn't about having God in your midst. It's about serving God in your midst. It's about being obedient to God in your midst. It's about humbling yourself in God in your midst. And what did David think was the only way that the greatest king of Israel, that the rest would be measured up to, including Jesus? He'd get into his underpants and he would dance in front of everybody. And that might sound like the craziest thing you're ever going to read in the Bible, and it isn't. There's more to come. There's a whole buttock exposing, beard shaving experience coming shortly. David didn't get rid of the crowds. It isn't a sense of we shouldn't do this so big and so bold. We don't need the lights. We don't need the music. We don't need the good worship. We don't need the great works. And I speak to myself here. It's so easy to be a Mikhail in this situation. Oh, what a great sight you cut. Shouldn't you be more dignified than this? You make a mockery of all things. We should be as David, who says, I will humble myself in the most way that I can, and the way that he could. This is not an expression that we're all going to dance naked in the church or in our underpants. It is an expression of humility that the great king, who should be boldly dressed, danced vigorously, that all might see that all that comes before is Jesus. What use is the fire of God if Jesus isn't first? What use is unity around the justice, the resurrection, the provision, and the mercy of God if Jesus doesn't come first? That I may be even more undignified than this, that I may be pulled away, that my flesh may be removed, that my pride may be taken, that me stamping my feet and saying, God, why won't you do it my way, is gone. And I humble myself and become undignified. To save his own life, David acted as a madman and spat in his own beard. To prove that God should not only be the center of his kingdom, but would be the center of him. He stripped away his kingly raiments, his earthly needs, and he declared, nothing but the Lord. Nothing but Jesus. And then he gave everybody a gift. A gift he wouldn't have been able to give them if he wasn't the king. But a gift he wanted to give them so that the message and lesson that he learned is the lesson that they should have. A lesson that Jesus taught not the disciples, but taught the disciples of John and the Pharisees. They were given some bread and some meat, and funnily enough, raisin cakes. And where do you read of raisin cakes? You read of them in the Book of Love, Song of Solomon. Feed me with your raisin cakes, my love. For they are the food of lovers. They are the dainties of the wedding feast. They are the gifts of the groom to the guests. That while the bridegroom is here, we don't mourn. Friends, we need to live like the bridegroom is here and not like he's gone. We We need to worship and serve and preserve. We need to make bond servants at the gate. And we need to worship and call the people to worship. And we need to care for the needy in our midst and be gatekeepers in the house of the Lord, not declare for the luxuries of the land, but for the politics of the Lamb, and for a kingdom that is made of the humble, that we might become undignified and glorify God, dancing in the way that we might declare overly and above all things that whilst the bridegroom is with us, we will rejoice. Not mourn. In the etiquette of Israel, if a funeral procession met a wedding procession, the wedding procession had the right of way. And we might think that's disrespectful. But life is for the living. And that life Jesus came to give you more abundantly. And those who think they're living in the tents, in the wicked places, they're the dead ones. But the way belongs to the marriage feast. The way belongs to the bridal party. The way belongs to the groom. And while he's with us, we won't mourn. We won't be as Michal here. Because when we're like Michal, when we behave like this woman who once loved David so much that she lied to her father and hid him, helped him escape, but now has become bitter inside. The love that she had for the Lord's anointed was gone. Both the love for her father and the love for her husband, it was gone. Now all she could see was dignity and respect, and mercy was gone. She had an ark without a mercy seat on it. And when you have an ark without a mercy seat on it, there are no children to be born. There's no life to be given. There's barrenness for that church when all you can do is see the indignity and not the humility. When all you can see is what others are saying and not what the Lord is looking at. But that's not his last message. This is his last message to us. David brought the ark back by putting Jesus as first and himself as last. He brought it back right, and it dwelt in our tabernacle, but not the tabernacle. The temple was still yet to come. The ark came first. But the ark had been on this journey. It had just had its delays too. And the start of the ark's journey did not begin with Phinehas and Hophni losing it to the Philistines in it, landing in a field and staying in Abinadab's garage. It began in this journey of promise to kingdom in Joshua. And we read of it here, just before they crossed the Jordan. These are the instructions for all the people who are wanting to cross over from the very promises that God had given you into his kingdom as he's called you. This is what it says in Joshua 3:3. And they commanded the people, saying, when you see the Ark of the Covenant of Jehovah your God, and the priests, the Levites bearing it, then you shall move from your place, and you shall go after it. Friends, the ark isn't always in the temple. But it's not the temple we go after, it's the ark. It's the ark we follow after. It's Christ that we chase after. It's Christ that we go after. And yet, what has been that journey? For a period of time, it sat, unimagined, unloved, without respect from those whose job it was to care for it. Sat dusty and irrelevant, whilst people fought over position and title and land. And then it came to Jerusalem. It came to the church. It came in power. And God who dwelt amongst the cherubim. It came